I have no fear of death whatsoever. I recently, 10 months ago, lost my husband. And I do remember that night that the night he died. Of course, I was up and I was crying all day long. It happened on our anniversary. It was a different story. But when I finally fell asleep, I saw a younger version of him walking around in what looked like that room. He looked very confused. I don't think I looked confused, but he looked very confused, and which told me that he ascended to heaven. And I feel like this experience, even though it was so many years ago, because it was really about 16 years ago, and I feel like that it helped prepare me for these adversities and these tragedies that I would have to deal in my life.
I'm here with Gina Lynelle Schaefer. Gina was born in Lafayette, Louisiana in 1970. Two enlightening experiences occurred in the realm of a near death experience. Upon having her child, she suffered from pancreatitis, which caused her temperature to rise and her heartbeat to pulse rapidly before slowing down. During this episode, she recalls hovering over her body, watching her husband hold his newborn son while the staff was taking him away, while Gina lay beside them, waiting to be revived. It wouldn't be for 4 years that another near death experience would change her life and thought processes altogether. Gina, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very blessed to have you as my guest.
Thank you.
I'm really
I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm really excited to hear about your experiences because I know they were very profound and very life changing. And I'll just leave it up to you where you want to start.
Um, well, I think probably the second one was definitely they were both very profound, and but they weren't scary, and I have to say that. And I feel like I should be allowed either a second birthday or life day, which would have just passed, because um I stopped breathing on March 25th and I came back on March 26th. So I just kind of recently um had a rebirth type of anniversary. Um, but I can tell you that it started where I was just extremely sick. And we kind of knew what was going on because it was the same thing that I had when I had my son, but I also started hemorrhaging really bad, and I lost a lot of blood. Like, they were saying she's losing pints of blood. They were trying to put blood in me, but it was just coming out as quickly as it put in me. And just like you're awaiting a storm, there was a storm going on in my area at the time that this was happening, and the only medication that they could get that would help me was actually in Galveston. And because all the roads were closed, my husband had to go and get the medication because they couldn't send it. And I was actually shocked that they let him have it. But during that process, they did lose me for a short time. Um, and it happened like right before midnight, and they were not able to revive me until about 10 minutes after, into the next day. And during that time, I remember vividly, I could still close my eyes and see everything that happened. The colors that are in your back screen, oddly enough, those are colors I remembered, except more iridescent and purples. It was like walking in bubbles, hearing angels, like singing, high pitched singing, but it didn't hurt my ears. Bright light, but yet it did not hurt my eyes. And it actually made me kind of came up with the idea of the last book that I told you about, because I remember feeling like I didn't want to go back. This warmth and love was surrounding me. And I've actually had a medium tell me that I went up to the fifth realm, and there's seven realms, in which I definitely believe that it, it was proof to me that I've always believed in God and I've always believed in a greater power, but heaven is real. And anybody who doesn't believe it, if they had my experience, they would definitely know that this is real. Um, I'm not sure how much, what all to go into it. I did see people there, but I didn't necessarily make out faces. They weren't dark shadows, though. I did, like I said, I've heard the music and I heard what sounded like bells. I did not necessarily see heavenly gates, but I did see where, like, and it wasn't in a tunnel. It was like I was already up and I was already lifted up. Like, I went up there fast. Whereas last time, the first time, I was hovering over my body. I knew everything. I could describe things. My husband said, how do you even know that? That wasn't even in the room where you were. But I knew, that my mother-in-law was there. I knew that his friend Dennis was there. I knew that he was really scared. He was like, how am I supposed to raise this child without her? And I had come back just as quickly. That particular time, I was actually visited by a nurse that I thought was an actual nurse there. Apparently, she was a nurse that was there many, many years before that said, you need to go back. This isn't your time. The second time this happened, there wasn't really any distinct wording that said you need to go back. It was just I was brought back into my body, and it wasn't like I was sucked back or anything like that. It was just all of a sudden I just opened my eyes, and it was too vivid for it to have been a dream.
Did you go through a tunnel or anything like that as you were exiting your body?
No, it was almost like I went up very quickly. It's like I quickly rose to that fifth realm. I did, like I said, I saw the bright lights, and I couldn't make out any gates or anything like that, but I was walking through, not really, I know everybody wants to think of the cliche of clouds. I didn't feel like I was walking through clouds. It was almost like I was walking through iridescent bubbles that was predominantly the purples and the pinks and the teals and those colors. And I was being greeted by people around me, although I didn't distinctly recognize anybody, but they were definitely there. And I just remember hearing the music, and it was so incredibly beautiful. And as I said, I saw the huge bright light, but I don't recall a tunnel.
Did the people there, you didn't recognize them, but did they feel familiar in any way?
I did. There was a strong sense of familiarity, and there was this huge hovering of love that was surrounded about me. And I feel like that they were probably related to me, maybe ancestral wise, or definitely spirit guides that were with me. Um, just because of the way they weren't intrusive, but they were very loving.
And you said the music was beautiful.
Yes,
Do you
but
feel
high
like
pitched.
high pitched? So I've had a lot of people recently tell me that heaven wasn't an actual place, that was more of a frequency. And so that's what interests me, especially about there being a music there, because music, is tones of frequency and vibration. Do you feel the same, like maybe heaven was a change in frequency, or did you actually feel like you were in another place?
I felt like I was in another place. I felt like that I, had floated up somewhere, and I was in a realm. I don't feel like I had reached all the way to heaven, because I do believe that in the different seven realms, and I realized that I reached a much higher realm. But the music, I could hear the angels singing, but it wasn't like distinct voices, but it was very high pitched. And I normally do not like high pitched sounds, they hurt my ears. This did not hurt my ears. The lights did not hurt my eyes. It was like there's just pure cleanliness about it, and just very, very wholesome. And I just remember these beautiful colors that were around me, which I really love those type of colors to begin with. So um, I was actually, when I woke up, I remember there was this part of me that was disappointed because I didn't want to come back. You know how when you have a really good dream and you're like, you wake up and you're like, oh man, I really want to go back and visit that dream again. That's how this was. And when they told me, look, we lost you for this amount of time, I wasn't surprised. You think that I'd be surprised, I'd be scared, that I wasn't freaked out. I will tell you, I have no fear of death whatsoever. I recently, 10 months ago, lost my husband. And I do remember that night, that the night he died. Of course, I was up and I was crying all day long. It happened on our anniversary. It was a different story. But when I finally fell asleep, I saw a younger version of him walking around in what looked like that room. He looked very confused. I don't think I looked confused, but he looked very confused, and which told me that he ascended to heaven. And I feel like this experience, even though it was so many years ago, because it was really about 16 years ago. And I feel like that it helped prepare me for these adversities and these tragedies that I would have to deal in my life, because I do have a higher sense, a stronger sixth sense than a lot of people that I know. Um, I've always had that faith, but I had that religious faith. I don't feel like I really hit into a spiritual type of faith, where I was really focusing on my own spirituality until after that second incident occurred.
First, I want to tell you that I'm sorry about the loss of your husband. I know that's very difficult, and I hope that you have found some comfort with your experiences and your preparation and being able to see him as well. That's beautiful.
Yes, I saw him that night, um, which I feel like, and I knew exactly where he was. I still hurt and I still grieve. I have dreams of him now, but I have dreams of him here with me and him, talking with me. But also he's much younger, and I know that when you go up, when you ascend, you do become your most perfect self. I was definitely younger and energized when I had my experiences. Again, it was almost difficult to come back. It makes me think, if somebody said, "Hey, can you choose to stay or go back?" I'd like to say I choose to go back and raise my son, but at that moment, in the way that I was feeling, I'm not sure if I would have. It
It
would have been
was,
difficult.
yeah, I've heard that it's incredibly beautiful and pleasant, and you just feel an ecstatic bliss, and it's a very difficult place to leave.
It is, and it's more than an ecstatic bliss. There's this peacefulness that comes over you. Like all of the weight of the world just dissipates. And as I had said, you're surrounded by this love, but you're also surrounded by all of the oppression that you feel here. And we all feel it to some sense, whether we suffer from depression or anxiety, or just somebody is mean to you on the street and it stresses you out. You see these, old 60s movies of, or Mayberry and, Andy and all of this goodness. And we don't have that in this world. And so after having this experience, I know that it can be accomplished again. It makes me realize that when somebody is yelling or being angry or ugly to you, they're hurting. It makes me realize that when somebody is fearful, because of their health, they don't necessarily know that there's something better that's waiting for them. There's the old saying that everything happens for a reason. I know that's to be the case, even if it's just to come back and say, heaven is real. A lot of people have experienced it. And I think that, more and more people are talking about it. And you had said something about the frequencies, maybe heaven is how we make it. They say hell is a repeat of our worst moments in our lives. Maybe heaven is, the best moments of our lives, that love that we feel when we're surrounded by people that truly love us for who we are unconditionally. And that's how it felt being up there. Like, no heavy weights, no stress, no exhaustive tiredness. It's just you're light as a feather and free, almost free from the pain and and just all the discouragement that is unfortunately surrounding our earth right now.
As you were moving up through the realms of heaven, you said you went right through to the fifth realm. Did you see the other realms? Was it like going up in an elevator, or how did you
No,
experience?
no, and that's what confused me. And that's when I actually went to kind of seek some help for it, because my first near death experience, and I was only out for a couple of minutes, and I was like, okay, first of all, I was like, really, twice? That was my first thought. And then I was like, well, maybe the first time wasn't good enough. He had to kick me in the butt. But from I went straight up to the fifth realm. I didn't, go through the elevator. I didn't go through, these time tunnels. It's like I was immediately brought up, and didn't go any further. And it was, and then I was down into my body again. And apparently there had been a lot more time that had passed, but I didn't suffer like any brain damage. I don't think so, because of this incident. And I actually had a full recovery as far as I ended up having to have emergency surgery, but I recovered from the surgery just fine. They said that, it would take me 6 to 8 weeks to recover. I was up and around, walking around, walking my baby in the stroller and stuff, within 2 weeks. I mean, and I wanted to get up earlier than that. My husband was just trying to make me stay in bed, but I was like, no, I feel fine. I'm ready to live.
Why do you think you were allowed to have this experience? And you kind of touched on it a little bit, like maybe the purpose is just to come back to share that God is real and heaven is real, but so many people have close to death experiences, were medically in a hospital during surgery or something, they were close to death, but don't have an experience. Why do you think the ones that do have experiences, specifically for you, were allowed to remember what happened?
Because I believe that God wants us to spread his message and to spread his love and to give hope. And, and I'm going to sound like I'm on a religious soapbox, but here we go. I spread his message through the books that I write, even though I don't write in the religious genre. The people that are reading the religious genre and they are not necessarily the ones that need to hear the word. I believe that many of us, nothing is really accidental, that I was placed in a circumstance that I was given certain, gifts such as writing to be able to spread his message. I heard of one particular guy who had a near death experience, but he actually claimed to have gone to hell. And somebody had asked him the same question. And it wasn't that his intent destination was hell, it's because he was told he needed to let people know that it was real. But I think that um, hell is the fire and brimstone that they try to scare us in some of the Sunday school classes. And I think that the important message is that God is love. And he wants you to know that you are welcome. He wants you to know that when you take your last breath on this earth, it is not the end of your life, that you have an eternal life and that it's with him. And to not be afraid to come home to him. You're on this planet, on loan. And there's this saying, in the Bible where, he giveth and he takes away. And it, it's like you're given this gift of life for a short period of time. And as part of that, you need to be a blessing to everybody else that you meet, especially to the ones that desperately need the blessings in their life. Because we all are suffering challenges and we're given those challenges for a reason. And when something good comes from it, we need to spread that message. We need to give that hope. And 16 years ago when this happened, but even now more so than ever, people need to hear that there is good waiting for us, that those that are trying to be kind and trying to do all the right things, and yet they still are getting slapped in the face by life, there is a reason for that and they can learn from it. You have a choice with the way you deal with situations. It's like you may not believe in God, but he believes in you.
I like that. And you were given gifts, you said, to help spread the word of God. Can you tell me a little bit more about these gifts?
I've always had the ability to write, but I didn't really get motivated to write until after these experiences. To actually write the novels. I was afraid to take that leap of faith. I was afraid I had to live that rigid life with the rules, and I still did for the longest time, but I was afraid to. There was just fear that kind of always stifled me. But I was always a talented writer. I was, talented in speaking. I always had that sixth sense where I knew when something was going to happen, or just that connection with the spiritual world. But I never really tapped into it, and I feel like this was God giving me permission to tap into it, but also just my spirit guide saying, "Hey, you're going to be okay." And there's so many people that fly by the seat of pants in life, but there's also people that are really gifted and genuinely need to take that leap of faith and they're afraid to do so, um, because they may not have money or their family will think they're wackadoodle saying, I have a lot of people that they realize, because they are there, they can't deny the fact, okay, this happened, we were there, but they don't realize what I experienced, what I went through, and it's almost like they're afraid to accept it. And sometimes you have to speak out, even when people are not willing to accept it. And you look at yourself. You've interviewed all these people, and you're having similar conversations, similar experiences. You know, all of these people, regardless of how different their experience was to mine, they experienced something. And, it has that common thread of that love, um, that, helplessness being pulled out of them and the, resurgence and excitement being put inside of them. There is something to it.
You had another near-death experience 4 years prior to
Yes.
this one, correct? Tell me a little bit about that, and do you think that they were connected in some way?
Um, I know that some of the ailments was connected. I The first one though was when I was giving birth to my son, and he was actually premature, and he it um I got pancreatitis, and I remember them saying, because pancreatitis is normally associated with people who do drugs and alcohol and stuff, something I don't do. And I remember, um, when the doctor coming to me, because they had to run all these tests, and I didn't want to take medication because I was afraid of hurting the baby, because I desperately wanted to have this child. I'd been trying to have a baby for so long, and I finally, had this chance. And I remember the doctor coming, hey, you have the same thing that Henry Hyde has. I was like, well, give it back to him. I mean, I was too sick to really, understand. And this is when my fever was spiked. They had hacked me with ice. And so they ran me in for an emergency C-section, and somehow they lost me. And that was very momentarily, but it was enough for me to remember floating over my body, seeing my husband, seeing the clamor going out, kind of floating away down the hallway, knowing who was there. And I think that was a trigger for my husband, because I was able to describe like what people were wearing, what they were saying, what was going on, who were the different doctors that were called in that I had never seen before. And I feel like that I was allowed to be given enough details for people to say, okay, she really did see something. She, she saw something, this really happened. But I never left the area. I was just there, like I was a ghost haunting them or something. Whereas the second time, I went straight up to the fifth realm. And like I said, walking through that, I mean, I don't know how else to describe it, but bubbles. Didn't feel like clouds. It felt like bubbles to me. And the beautiful colors. And like I said, they weren't bright, they were soft, but they were very vivid. And, you know, I'm sorry, I kind of lost track of what your question was. I know you were asking me about the first one and if they were connected. I
Yeah.
think everything is connected. I think everything is entwined with each other. It's just, you meet somebody, you bump into somebody in the street, and if you're kind to them, that person, they could be having the worst day in their life, and you could be the one thing that stops them from going and, pulling the trigger on themselves. You just don't know what kind of impact that you're having. And until you run into them. And that's what I feel like that was God saying, okay, I need you to do this. I need you, to spread my message. You can write your books, you can write your scary paranormal horror books, but I need you to put me into it. And, and I know, even before I write, like I sit down, I close my eyes, I light a candle, and I'll say the words, whatever needs to come out of me. And sometimes I'll go back and I'll realize, like, wow, I wrote that. I mean, just almost dumbfounded. As I told you prior to recording, I don't know what I'm going to write until I sit down and write it. But then again, if you think about it, when you woke up this morning, you didn't know what kind of background I was going to have. You didn't know that I was going to be wearing a hat. You didn't know if you were going to lose power or not. You don't know what life is going to bring you until you experience it. But you can choose how you deal with it.
That is an important message. You can choose how you react in your life, and that's really the only thing you can control is your own actions. Um, we talked a little bit about you writing your books and you
Mhm.
sitting down and not knowing. Do you think that it's spirit or God or the universe moving through you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I sit down and I was like, sometimes I'll be like, oh, my character knows this. I didn't know that. It's like, I know you see like on the movies in Hollywood and stuff, and they've got their storyboards and their post-it notes all over the place. Not me. I got my study. I sit down, I light my candle. I mean, I have, my drink going, my coffee, whatever it is that I happen to be drinking that day, always non-alcoholic. See, I'm not Stephen King. I don't need alcohol or drugs to be able to get my brain going. It has enough problems on its own. I sit and I write, and then what comes out is what comes out. Um, and it doesn't have a religious touch to it. Yes, but I'm glad that it does because it also what sets my works out from different from other people. In one of my last books, City Hall Possession, the majority of the protagonists are archangels.
Were you a writer before your near death experiences, or was that kind of like a catalyst that got you going?
I think it was the catalyst that got me to going. I always wanted to write, but to sit down and say, and I've always wanted to write books, but I just I had to make money. I had to work. I had to do, follow that conventional life and support my family. And, it wasn't until after those experiences that I realized I can do both. I have to discipline myself, but I can do both. And there are times that, I'm not gonna lie, there are times I'm like, I don't feel like doing it. But once I sit down in front of my computer and I start letting it out, I'm really glad that I did, because I can write for 2, 3 hours solid and, you know, just not like I say, sometimes I even go back when I go back after I'm done with the book and I go back to read what I've written. I'm even shocked at some of the things that have come out and how the words just flow together. And it's like, sometimes I think I guess I get that imposter syndrome because I'm like, dang, I'm not that smart, but it came out like that.
Oh, wow. That's crazy how you can sit down and write and it just flows through you and sometimes you're not even really aware of the words that are coming through you.
I'm not.
Isn't that called something? It's called, I want to say it's called like inspiration, but there's a better word for it that has specifically to do with writing. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I also am aware, I know that a lot of spiritualists, and this was probably more popular in the Victorian ages, and I probably need to Google it, but like how some mediums, like they'll say that they're talking to ghosts and that they'll be writing and stuff like that. I don't know what that's called, but I mean, I see you nodding, so I think you know what I'm talking about. Like they'll be like this, and they'll writing, and they have no clue what they're writing. It's not exactly like that because I'm not writing in scratch. I'm not, I don't have Annabelle. I swear though, sometimes I think I'm surrounded by muses though, because it's like, people have guardian angels on their shoulder. I think I have muses on my shoulder. Um, Certain environments will also bring more out of me. But even like in my room, like I know I have this background, but I actually behind me I have in my room. Let me see if I can take away my background. I don't know if I can right here, but I have a Thomas Kincaid mural that's like of a country garden type of setting, and so I do kind of set an ambiance for myself. But as far as just getting down, and sometimes I write some really really gruesome stuff. One of my, actually two of my books, I've had friends say, that book gave me nightmares. I liked it, but it gave me nightmares. It's like, was it so bad that I wrote? Oh, them? Oh no, no, no. And they always read my books. So um, I do feel like that's a gift because I've taught English for many years, and I can teach you, I can edit and revise your stuff. I can teach you grammar and punctuation. But one thing that I can't teach you is creativity and how to think. You can take creative writing classes and get constructive criticism, but those incredible, amazing ideas that just flow out of you, those come from you. That comes from a higher power than any teacher can teach you. And some people have it, just like some people have a beautiful voice, or some people are born with idyllic memories or incredibly high intelligence. We all have those special gifts. We just don't always all tap into them.
So it is a divine gift, and everyone has unique divine gifts.
Yes.
And if someone wanted to develop their gifts and outside of having a near death experience where they're directly connected with the other side, what do you recommend that they can do?
Meditate if they're religious. I mean, obviously pray, go to church, um, find their own niche in the world. Like I said, when, I put together my study and I find that perfect, and I create the environment for myself to get the best out of me. Um, do not allow negativity around you. And that's one thing that's really hard to do, especially in today's world, because there's, as much as you want to pull yourself up, there's always that person that wants to drag yourself down. And sometimes those people are what's closest to you, and you do have to push them away because you don't need that negativity around you. There's no reason for anybody to be toxic towards you and to crush your dreams. I was very blessed that for 27 years, actually 30 years, because we dated for 3 years prior, that I had a husband. And at first, he was kind of like his parents. He's like, I don't think so. That's too unconventional. But I do remember, because my son, he's a gifted artist, and he designed my first book cover. And I went out to him, and he was in the garage one day, and I said, "Hey, you want to see a cool piece of artwork that your son made?" He's like, "Yeah, sure." So I showed him the book, because I actually had the book published and everything. I handed him the book, and I said, "Oh, and the words inside, I wrote those." And so that's how he found out that I wrote my first book. And it actually took him several months till he finally sat down and read it, and then he was like, wow, this is really good. He also knew I could write, because I would have to write things for him, or, I could write, and he would say, "Gosh, you're such a talented writer." But he never thought that I could expand that into a full novel. And the thing is we always question ourselves until we do it. And it's just like my writing. The more you write, the better you're going to get. The more you read, the better writer you're going to become. It's just like somebody who has a naturally gifted voice, they may need to take voice lessons or vocal lessons to help, strengthen their diaphragm or to perfect their craft. But that doesn't mean they didn't have a natural talent. It's just like we've got brilliant people all around us, but you can't ask them to, you know, go do brain surgery until they are taught how to do brain surgery. You just got to walk out on a limb and do it.
You became a writer after your near death experience. Did that happen pretty soon after? Did it take some time for it to unfold? How did that take place? Did you quit your normal traditional career? How did all this play out for you?
I started writing. I had the ideas for years, and I had little nuggets here and there. I didn't actually sit down and write till a few years after my second near death experience, where I was just like, I'm just going to do this. And I wrote a little bit at a time, like on weekends. I still kept my job, I still kept this, but it wasn't until I actually said it out loud to a few friends of mine that I'm writing a book. And then I felt committed, like I had to do it now to show that I can do it. Because one thing is, I'm very determined. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do something. And so once I said it out loud, the motivation happened for me to do it. And didn't even know how the end scene, except I had how it was going to end, until I had a dream. And that's really kind of it. And I think, again, I feel like that was just kind of a gift that was given to me. And then I sat down and wrote and made it come to life. And I know that Teddy Hall was my first book, and it has a real dramatic ending that, again, brings in life and death, and good versus evil. That it's kind of a David and Goliath type of story. And the second one, it was actually supposed to be a standalone book, but people were begging. I even had, it was one thing when my friends were like, "You got to write a sequel, you got to write a sequel." When I was going on book signings at market shows or things like that, or people were contacting me on the internet saying, "Hey, do you have another one coming out? Do you have a sequel to this? What happens to so and so?" That's when I realized, okay, all right, maybe I do need to do a sequel. So I did a sequel, and that one came out even better than the first one. And I'm writing a current book, but when I'm done with that book, I will be, which is actually more surrounded about spirituality. It just has a little bit of witchcraft and magic in it, because I got to have that sci-fi stuff in there. Um, but I'll do a third one, and I'm like, okay, this is it. We've got the possession. The next one is the resurrection, and then we're done.
So you said you had a dream. Do you regularly have prophetic dreams
Oh,
or?
yes, very prophetic, vivid dreams. Very, very much so. I've always had those, though. I mean, even when I was very little, I would, come out and say, hey, I saw this, or I saw this, I saw this. And they're like, people are like, okay, that's kind of strange. But this was the dream was just a very dramatic ending to my book. And I don't want to give too much of a spoiler to the ending of the book because you got to kind of read the beginning of the book. But it has some unusual protagonists and people that come together to fight evil. Of course, good wins because they have to.
Always.
Yeah.
Were you raised in a religious household?
I call it pseudo religious. I was when I was about 11 years old, we just randomly started going to the Catholic Church, and but it was kind of superficial. It was almost like we were going for I don't know, for appearances. And I always, I mean, even before then, I would find myself reading the Bible. Of course, I was always drawn to Psalms just because it was easier to read. But my parents they weren't into that. And even as I grew up and we did join the church, there wasn't really like deep prayer groups or anything like that. It was just like it's just like I said, it was like we go to look good, but really wasn't deep. But it wasn't until my adulthood that really deepened for me. And I think that the older that I get, the more deeper it goes. And then also the more that I yearn for a simpler life. And, I recognize the simplicities of things versus, you know, the materialistic. Like, I don't care who sees me in church. I don't care, who sees that I'm praying. I don't care who sees me doing this with very little makeup and a ball cap on. I mean, it's not about appearances anymore.
Did your religious views or your spiritual philosophies change after your near death experience?
I definitely think so. Yes, I think I was much more open to the spiritual realm. I don't want to say the occult, but I always believed in spirits and ghosts and things like that, just because I had some supernatural occurrences that happened to me even at a very young age. But I started, in fact, that's why I went to a medium who was able to explain to me I went to the fifth realm. And I had to go through a few of them because a lot of them were quacks. And I mean, it was like I could feel it burning in my head. Okay, these people are lying, they're crazy. But I actually, I after going to a therapist, he was like, okay, what you want is real. You don't need me. If anything, I need you. And so um, I actually eventually, after I had went to the one medium who was able to give me some information, and she was able to provide me with some details that nobody else would have known. She realized that not only in writing I had some other gifts, so she actually hooked me up with a paranormal investigator who trained me and took me out, on investigations and things like that. And I was able to help people with some healing there. Um, and so I think that just being around that and focusing on that and then being able to incorporate it into my writing, it's just like, it's like when you start, you're going to build your knowledge and you're going to become more in tune to that spiritual world. And that's what I think that I've done. And I've noticed that in my books, I'm going more and more into, doing research as like, the cycles of the moon and all of these different things and questions about the universe. I'm digging deeper into, and a lot of that has come after my near death experiences.
Are you able to access that place or that realm still, or is it, I don't know, like in meditation or even in your day-to-day life?
I do, especially when it's quiet and calm. I'll close my eyes and I'll focus on it. I don't know if you could say I astral protect myself there. I don't. But I do pray for that feeling and for that love. Um, a lot of times I forget to do that, especially during real stressful times in my life. But during the stillness, especially at night when everything is quiet and calm around me, and I am able to access it. And again, the more that I know, because you begin, the older you get, the more you tend to recognize things in yourself, especially if you're focusing on it. If you're really focusing on that spirituality and things like that, you start to recognize things in yourself and how to bring yourself to a positive place. And once I've started to be able to do that, then even with the death of my husband and and prior to losing my husband, I lost my in-laws back to back. And I was, I love them to pieces, but I was able to use some of what I learned. Does it help 100% with the grieving process? No, nothing helps with the grief. Grief is love. There's nothing really helps with that. But, and, my husband was young when he died. So, to say he was in a better place, I don't like those words either, just because I'm selfish and I want him with me. But I am able to access that I will be with him again. That there is, that he is at peace, that he is feeling eternally what I felt in that brief time. And that actually brings me comfort. And that my in-laws are going through it as well, because they were very skeptic. And they were among the ones that were there. And they're just like, and I remember my mother-in-law was like, okay, it's one thing that this happened to you once, but then it happens twice. Because, she was always heard, lightning don't strike twice. And I'm like, this wasn't lightning. This was something else. But I think it's important, though, for anybody. And I think that all people have that ability to take themselves to that place. It's just a matter, even if it's just to find mediation, or meditative exercises, focusing on a tree, focusing on a door, there's all these different things. I always focus on something to do with nature just because I like nature. But, sometimes they'll say focus on a pendulum or whatever it is, and close your eyes and concentrate. Imagine, that cobalt blue surrounding you, that, orb of protection. I think people can do it. They just need to be able to focus, and they need to be open to it. Not everybody's open.
We were talking about the forest before we started in the beautiful
Yeah.
picture that you have behind you of the forest. Do you think that it's easier for people to be in nature and connect to those energies, or does it really matter?
For me, it is. I can't speak for everyone. For me, it is. Um, I've walked along the streets of New York and I've loved it, but I feel more alone walking down the streets of New York than I do with nature, because I feel more in tune to my surroundings. But I'm also a Southern girl. And so I it's not like I don't consider myself a huge outdoors person, but I do like walking in the woods. I like walking along the lake. I'm that person that has to stop it. Oh, look, a deer across the street. I mean, something shiny. Look at the birds. And so it's easier for me to make that connection amongst nature. Um, I in in the book that I'm reading now, or I'm writing now, I'm doing some research on different types of magic, and what the part of the research is saying is that, go out into the grass barefoot and let the earth connect to you. And as regardless of how this makes me look, it's like, oh, well, it says to do this. I'm going to go try it so I can write about it, because I'm big on imagery. And so I want to put those sensations and those feelings inside my book. So I'll go and try that. And it's like, hey, I do feel a connection here. Some people will say, well, that's in your head. So what if it is? If it makes me feel better, if it makes me feel connected, well, it does start with the mind. You have to clear your mind to reach that higher power.
Tell me a little bit more about your books,
Okay.
specifically, like the individual books that you have available, what they're like, and how people can find them.
Okay. Well, they can go through my website, GinaLynelle.com. I write paranormal horror, although all the books tend to be very different. The Tinny Hall series, I said about what that is um, I have a pastor who is a very bad dude, and he's also a snake handler that lives in Tinny Hall, Texas, which is a real place in East Texas, by the way. And his daughter is a clairvoyant, mute, autistic girl that has the ability to see spirits and ghosts. Um, The sheriff of the town um, is actually based off my late husband. He's in all my books, and his son has is a bit Asperger's, which is based off my son, and he has the ability to make connections and to hear and to perceive different things. And what happens is the pastor is having this illustrious affair, and he ends up, and he's a snake handler, got to throw that in there. I'm definitely afraid of snakes, so of course I had to write about it. And he ends up killing a teenage lover, and she was not a good person herself, but as a dead person, she gets a little bit better. And so the story is surrounded by the mystery of this death, and that's what it was supposed to end up. But when I sat down and started writing, somehow demons got in, and they were focusing on good old Pastor Dan, and they were influencing him. And so that's kind of what brings in the angels. And so that was one of those occurrences. I had no idea where that book was going until I wrote it. And that was one where I had people calling me saying, we need a sequel. We need to know what happens to this. We need to know what happens to that. So that I wrote the second book called The Possession, Titty Hall, The Possession. And all of the little towns take place in East Texas, except for one little town, the Coshada, Louisiana, not the casino, the little town. And it has 5 different points, like a pentacle. And this demon is possessing young minds and making them commit these horrendous criminal acts in efforts so that they can gain luxury and success and material goods. And so I had the same kind of oddball cast of characters coming in, and they're able to do the sleuth, because the Joseph, the character in uh, Tinny Hall, that actually he's a college student in the first book, where he's studying forensic science, and he actually works at the body farm, which there is really a body farm in this area where they do the studies, and that's where the body gets dumped. um, I had the second book happening 5 years later, where he's actually a forensic scientist in Houston. And so, because all these tiny little East Texas towns, they have to go to Houston Houston and Dallas, because their sheriff departments are unable to solve these crimes on their own. And so he ends up going on a mission, and he's training a new recruit, and who's his best friend, who becomes his best friend, Michael. Throughout the first book and the beginning of the second book, he's always praying the prayer of St. Michael for protection. He doesn't realize that Michael is the angel coming down to answer his prayers. So it has those little mixes. And I didn't know that he was going to be in the book. I didn't know, that was one of those situations. I didn't know where they were coming. And so it was just kind of one, it's like, wow, I came up with that. Those are probably my two, especially at book signings and at Comic Cons and Paracons. Those tend to be my most popular sellers. I wrote a book called The 13th Hour. And the 13th hour is about a young girl who time travels through time. And the reason why it's called the 13th hour is during the time change, where we gain an hour, lose an hour. That's the hour of time that she travels. And at the beginning of the book, she's in a really bad accident. And so she's in the hospital, and she meets up with a nurse who turns out to be her spirit guide, Alma Chaser, who walks her through this. And Alma means soul in Spanish, and who walks her through all of these Victorian times. Just from, I think the earliest is from like the Salem witch trials, and she goes all the way through the 70s, but they're kind of in different orders. But she has to learn something about herself, so she's kind of visiting pieces of her past life. But the problem is that her past life tends to be entwined with all these different serial killers that happened in that were their real characters. So sometimes I've had actually bookstores put this book in their historical nonfiction, just because there is, there is the character, many of the characters in there are real. For example, the 1920s, there's a psychic that in gangster Chicago that the women used to go visit, because the men were out cheating and running all over them in these speakeasies and stuff. And the psychic would say, "You need to buy health insurance." they're going to die soon. I predict that they're going to die soon, but I'm making you these brownies, but don't eat them. Give them to your husband. And she laced them with strychnine. And this is a real person that really did this. And I see you smiling, and it is kind of funny, but she really did do this. And so she runs into all of these characters, but she still has to learn, information about herself. And but that's the time period, that's when she travels, is the 13th hour. And I have a lot of young kids young kids, I say teenagers, that just go crazy over that one. um, Pied Piper's Prince is loosely based off the crimes of Dean Corll. He became famous around the John Casey case too. Here in the Houston area, he in South Houston and in the Heights area in the 1970s, he killed 28 boys. He raped and tortured them. But what was unique about his thing, one, is he's the person that serial killer was coined after, but also he enlisted two teenage boys to help. He would pay them $200 for every boy that they bring to him. And so this particular book takes place between, I have part of it being written in or being told and narrated in the 2000s, where a reporter moves into the house, because the house actually was not knocked down until this past February. But she actually lives in the house where these crimes occurred. And the house was actually for sale recently, but somebody bought it and tore it down. And she is experiencing in her dreams, prophetic dreams, I guess you can say, but she's having paranormal dreams where she's actually seeing and witnessing the things that happen. The beginning of the book is narrated by a person that is academically challenged or intellectually challenged, named David Prince, and he is looking for his boss's son, and he's in his early 20s himself, but he thinks like a young child, and he gets taken in, but he doesn't realize that he's dead, because even though he realizes this other woman is kind of peeking into their lives, in his mind it's still 1970. And so he's telling the story, and then it's like kind of broken in different sections where it goes back and forth, and then there's the veil where they meet each other and they talk within the veil, which is between the realms. And that one is probably, especially because of the area, because I like live right down the street from where the guy is buried, and so especially around the anniversary of when all of this happened, uh it that is a really big seller. That one's called Pied Piper's Prince. And then the very last one is Sharon's Last Call, and I told you about this one. This takes place in a realm of hell. And it's broken up, like on one side is the gates of heaven, and then on the other side there's the gates of hell, and they're like in this rotunda. And there's the stream, which is like the trail of tears, where the people that are grieving, their tears feed the waters of the anchoring waters and the different waters that surround this bar. And the stories get told around this bar. Basically, people that are suffering from a coma in different time periods, regardless of how they got that way, whether accident or something. And the people, they gamble in like a casino until they get the guts to go over and they visit Sharon. And then Sharon they tell their stories. They kind of pull all their woes and stuff like that before they gamble to determine if they are going to be allowed, if they're going to go back to living again, if they're going to wake up from their coma, if they're going to die, or sometimes they get a choice. They can determine if they're going to live or they're going to die. All of them are going to pretty much have consequences. And but it's this one is more introspective. This was the one I said that I thought that you would like, just because you really touch base with your spiritual side on this one.
Well, that's a amazing collection of books. They all sound
Thank you.
fascinating. And those are all available on your website, you said, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, there's links that it'll take you to trailers, that so you can see the book trailers of them. But you can also it'll like have, like, you can order now, and you'll click on the button and it'll take you to where you can order them.
Good. And I'll link that website down below. So if anybody wants to find it, it'll be in the description. And do you have any last words of wisdom for my viewers?
Believe in yourself and believe in the world and what the world is trying and the universe is trying to tell you.
That's lovely. Thank you so much, Tina,
Sure.
for for being my guest. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed every second of this.
I know I've enjoyed it too. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and supporting my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing if you enjoy near death experiences and other spiritually transformative stories. It helps the algorithm know that this information is useful and push it out to more people. And that's the goal, to get as many people to know that we are eternal spiritual beings and that we never die. Our bodies might die, but our essence will never die. And I want people to live with less fear. Let's all spread the word. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that little notification bell so you get all the notifications when my videos post. Thank you for all of your support. I'm sending love to you.